Thanks. So I always think it's interesting when they choose a white guy to teach racial classes. But I wanted to let you know first, I have a little more experience in this than most of you would anticipate. So I adopted 5 children from foster care. So first of all, I'm a veteran of the foster care world with 16 years experience there. My oldest child, thank you. I don't say this for the accolades. My oldest child on the left there is 27 now. They're having their first baby in November. He's a little bit fetal alcohol, a little bit bipolar, a little bit ADHD, a little bit of everything. So he was a very difficult child to relate to, but as soon as I met his mother, all of a sudden it made sense. And so my first experience in dealing with disparities in populations was really with his family. They were a very low-income family. He idealized them, and I actually took the family to Texas on a road trip one summer so that he could get in touch with where he came from. They lived in a single wide with holes in the floor that had plywood over them. They had dirty diapers all over the floor, and it was a very eye-opening experience for him. But it also explained to me, as a person, a lot about how to deal with him and how to explain things to him. He was 5 when I got him. That was the community he was raised in. And I'm coming from a 2-parent home. My dad's an tax accountant. My mother was a stay-at-home mother. We went to Catholic school growing up. So it was a very different world. My next 2 children, the one in the middle and the one on the right there, are biological brothers that I got. They're both a quarter Hispanic. So we've introduced now the white, poor income, low-income family to some Hispanic background. And then you can see the twins in the front. That's a little family joke that started years ago. One's half black and one's completely Norwegian. And so it's amazing the disparity in their visual appearance, how many people ask me if they're biological twins. They're 5 weeks apart. I would never have adopted 2 kids 5 weeks apart, but that's where we are. We went to Starbucks one day, and the lady looked at Jay on the left, and then she looked at my other son, Justice, on the right, and she said, "Did you bring your friend with you?" And I looked her dead in the eye, and I said, "No, they're twins." And it's kind of a joke that's stuck. So if you look at my Facebook page, you'll see that reference all over the place. But we bring a lot of racial disparity, a racial difference, racial experiences, but not only that, socioeconomic experiences in the background. The son on the right is getting married on the 2nd. He's marrying a woman from Chamorro, Guam. So we're introducing yet another layer of culture to our family. So we have a little bit of experience with this. Oops. On top of that, I was a teacher for 16 years. So I've seen a little bit. The definition of disparate is different outcomes affecting similarly situated people in different ways. So you fill in the blanks. What's the outcome? What's the group of people you're talking about? You'll notice that definition does not include race. A lot of us talk about the differences in outcomes in terms of racial categories. But you'll see later in the presentation, race will make up less than half of the categories we talk about. We talk about socioeconomic, we talk about intellectual disabilities, we talk about physical disabilities. There's a lot of differences in people these days that give rise to different outcomes. The rate of discipline and arrest for one group of students is greater than for another group of students. That's when we start using the word disparate. The severity of punishment sometimes varies. Sometimes the frequency of punishment varies. Either one of those will get you to disparate. I was laughing with Aaron, I don't know where he is back there somewhere, but I plagiarized this presentation. They sent it to me from last year. They figured they had a little experience in the topic. So tools to express disparity often come in terms of statistics. As a junior high math teacher, algebra level, I can make these statistics say anything I want to. So the one I want to show you here is 10 Native American students were disciplined out of 100. So that's 10%. Written as a decimal, that's 0.10. Or 96 Caucasian students were disciplined out of 1,600, and that's 0.06. If you put that as a ratio, or a fraction, for those of you that know math, we end up with a division and a 1.67. If I were to flip that over, my number would be 0.6. It'd be a very different number. Ratios, fractions, statistics say what you want them to say. You can manipulate them in any way to show that you're doing a good job or a bad job or a mediocre job. What you want to do is you want to start talking about what got you to those numbers, not what somebody else thought about the numbers. And that's really key distinction when you're talking about disparate outcomes, is what got you there, not what somebody is telling you your numbers represent. So a couple of quick cartoons. I didn't have any accurate numbers, so I just made them up. I had 87 studies that showed that that was a good tool. I used to think correlation implied causation. Statistics class helped me with that. Maybe it helped me. Statistics will say what you want them to say. So let's talk about the actions being evaluated. The key action in a school is discipline. What does discipline look like in your school? We're not so much worried about arrest statistics out of school because every school has the same stupid students making the same stupid mistakes, making the same stupid entry into the criminal justice world. What we're talking about is how did we get there? What happened before the arrest and the stupid decision that got them into the criminal justice system? So when we're looking at this, what are our types of discipline that we offer? There's a whole list of them here. Community service, counseling, in-school suspension, behavior monitoring, lunch or after-school detention, loss of privileges, increased suspension, parent notification, informal catch and release, so to speak. I hear some chuckles there. What are our limitations, though? In school, I taught with teachers who remembered the paddle. They swore by the paddle. I see some nods out there. But most of our discipline behaviors now are limited to non-contact, non-meaningless consequences. So community service is a meaningful contact. It's part of a restorative justice type of program. Catch and release, where you counsel the person, this was not good behavior. It's direct instruction. It's intended to teach them what they did wrong, give them an opportunity to fix it, and go forward and not do it again. OSPI tends to focus on these two words right here, exclusions and expulsions. So exclusion is anytime you're missing a class session because of discipline. Anytime you're missing a class session. So that could be 1, it could be 5, it could be 10. In-school suspension would count for that. Visiting the nurse would not count for that. Expulsions are out of school, kick you out. OSPI tracks both of those. If any of you use Skyward in school, those statistics are counted. Again, statistics are counted for you, but it's up to your school to tell you what that means, unless you have access to the data. Then you can tell what it means. Behaviors that result in arrest are criminal statutes, and there is discretion whether it's a referral or an arrest, especially at school. Juvenile law, as you know, is constantly changing, and we're on a liberal swing. And so the Supreme Court is limiting what we can do with juveniles when they're detained, when we have probable cause, and then ultimately how much contact we can have them once they're physically arrested. They have to be advised they have a right to an attorney. They actually have to be put in contact with an attorney now. And most of the times it means that law enforcement is not questioning them any longer once that probable cause for a crime has been determined. I'm cruising through this part because it's kind of the boring part. So when we look at groups, oftentimes we're looking at racial groups, but these specifically do not indicate low income. Education is not valued. For example, first-generation college parents, foster care, lack of stable housing, domestic violence, mental health, drug use, any of the other factors that can come along. And any of those factors can cause a student to have a different behavior pattern than a student who perchance had two parents had a breakfast, had a bed to sleep in, had heat overnight, any of those situations. So we have to start looking at the dynamics of behavior. One of the things that I it rubbed me wrong when I first read it, and the more I thought about it, I kind of understood what it was trying to say. The disparity in disciplinary outcomes may be better explained by the behavior of teachers and principals in the schools rather than student characteristics such as behavior, misbehavior, poverty, race, special needs, any of those kinds of things. And I had to go back to my first child, who was low income. He didn't understand the value of a bath. Fought me on it. And I remember specifically one day I had told him to get in the tub 3 or 4 different times and he wouldn't. And I just picked him up in his clothes and I set him in the tub. And he had a screaming fit about it. And it was one of those things when I met his family, I understood his aversion to a bath. But we all have had those students that come in that smell, that don't understand the value of deodorant, that don't understand the value of changing clothes. And it's your reaction to them, oftentimes, that contributes to where the outcome or the interaction is going to go. It's not necessarily them. And I think that's an important distinction to remember. I had this one student, he was 14. He was in a sophomore class for English. And he would come in these dirty clothes, smelling of BO. His teeth looked like he'd been a meth user, just no dental care whatsoever. And his clothes were a size or two too tight. And if you know anything about teenage boys, that's not a good thing. So I said something to the counselor a couple of times asking for an intervention. And nobody had time to get to him yet. And so finally I sat him down and I just started with, why aren't we doing homework? His mother worked nights. He lived in a motel where he rented a room weekly with his family. His mother used a lot of marijuana and they were in danger of being kicked out. They didn't have any clothes. They had the one shower, but they weren't allowed in the room while their mother slept during the day, so they entertained themselves outside in the evenings. So he didn't have access to a desk or his computer to be able to do his homework because his mom wouldn't let him take that outside. So the more I talked to him, the more I realized these are barriers that he can't overcome. So I taught after school, we called it tutoring, we called it teacher help, whatever you wanted to call it. But I was there for an hour and a half, 3 days a week, and I encouraged him to stay because he could walk home. And so he got an hour and a half to start working on his homework every day. And his smell didn't change. I had to get over that. His clothes didn't change, but his academic performance started to change because he had an adult that started to pay attention to him. So it was an intervention that was pretty easy on my part, but at the same time, it could have gone very differently if we had demanded him turn in his work, failed him because he wasn't, and sent him on to the next grade level. He would not have graduated high school. And so I don't tell that story to take credit for it. I tell that story to make a point that there's a difference that could be made in these students based on your approach to them. So students' actual objective, their actual behavior, needs to be balanced with our subjective response to that behavior. If our response is completely negative, their behavior will become negative. If our response is neutral, calm, and prospective, where is this going to get you? Explaining the roots of this behavior, explaining what's coming, the odds are that we'll get a different response from that student. So we try to understand what the student is communicating, and oftentimes we have to dig for that communication. It's not readily apparent. The behavior, using our empathy and limiting our subjective expectations and experiences, will reinforce with the student that they have an adult they can trust. And that's a goal. We want adults that they can trust. So these are some quick statistics here. If you look, males are pretty high on the discipline chart. Low income is pretty high. If you look at the races down at the bottom, black is pretty high. Homelessness is very high. These all say it in different ways, but these are compared to whites. Each of those races receive more exclusion and expulsion. And then if you compare directly, blacks with whites, it's 3-to-1, or the risk of facing multiple suspensions, it's 4-to-1. And so some of us have what we call implicit biases. It's the same when you see the studies about juries and death sentences. Minorities are sentenced to death more often than whites are sentenced to death. It's a bias that we possess. So, a couple of these slides are a little bit duplicative, so I apologize for that. Whoops. I hit the wrong button. So our bias here can be implicit, explicit, personal, or institutional. So I worked at Fife. Everybody know where that is? Over by Tacoma. I worked there for 11 years. We have a high Pacific Islander population compared to the districts around us. We have a high transitory population because there were a lot of apartments in our district. And our district is only 3,900 students, I think it was when I left. But the number of minority teachers we had was very low. We had 3 gay teachers. We had 1 black teacher at the junior high. We didn't have any at the high school. And yet we had students with all of those characteristics coming through our school. So one of the things you have to look at is what's the institutional or structural biases your organization brings to the table. Many times, better districts that pay more attract your higher educated teachers, and oftentimes those are your whiter teachers. Your lower income teachers oftentimes work in the districts that they live in, and if you have a district that has trouble with behavior, oftentimes you have teachers of students who live in those districts. When the freeways went in, they divided neighborhoods in half. And so the neighborhoods that were closer to the freeway were lower income, and the dynamics of those cities changed. The higher income people could afford to move farther away from the freeways. And so the better schools, the more money from property taxes were away from the freeways. The schools closer to the freeways were lower income, lower resources, lower opportunities. You have to look at your institutional and geographical, political dynamics to understand sometimes the disparities that come with the students that come through your schools. Again, discipline is very subjective. The goal is to not be as subjective as you can, to be as objective as you can. Do you treat everybody this way for this specific infraction? And I know from working with teachers, there are students who just get under your skin. We all have them. We all deal with them. One of the best tactics I ever did was there was a teacher across the hall, and her door lined up with my door, and we could just look at each other, and we knew somebody was having a moment. And it was pretty easy to just say, send them over here. And so I could send them to get me something from the other teacher, and the other teacher would delay them. Just give me that breather for a few minutes. Sometimes that was all I needed, was that little breather. Sometimes she kept them for the period. It depended on whether I closed my door or not. But we kind of had that system. And letting somebody else deal with it sometimes is your best tool. That sometimes is your best tool to keep things objective. We've talked about a lot of these on here. I don't necessarily go in order. The focus I want to put today, though, is the difference between the traditional scenes of policing where you're making the arrests and the scenes where the law enforcement is interacting with students. This is where everything is being pushed. So we had a school resource officer. He was our officer for 5 years. Gilbert, we all refer to each other by last names only. So Gilbert was active in Special Olympics. He used to fundraise for it. He started a volleyball tournament for the school involving Special Olympics. He was an assistant football coach. He would go to lunch with the kids. He oftentimes would take them home and talk to parents if they needed to. It was his interaction with the students that got him respect. And that's what got students feeling obligated because they knew he was an adult that could be trusted. He knew that he was an adult that could be safe. And they used to interact with him. And that was positive. So, supportive relationships, positive student SRO. Anybody call them SSOs over here? Yeah, okay. I hadn't heard that before, but I actually looked it up. Yes, sir?
SROs are law enforcement.
Okay. Okay.
There's a contract between the school district and law enforcement agency under the funding of that office. Is a actual commission police officer.
You would have thought I knew that by now, right?
SSO is just school safety officer or school security officer.
Yeah, the OSPI said school security officer. I did look that part up. Unfortunately, their definition was shorter than yours. Oops. Sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. One of the things that Fife used to say was relationships, rigor, and relevance. So you build your relationship with your student, then you demand more from them, and then you make sure it's relevant to them. And if you do that, you have academic rigor and high expectations. You have students who will rise to the challenge because you have a relationship that they know is supportive and positive. So whether that's from a teacher in a classroom where we demand them to perform higher, or whether that's from an SRO who's having that same conversation as a friend, or whether that's from an SRO or an SSO who is having a conversation about behavior expectations, that relationship pulls the student into the conversation. And when you're having a conversation with a friend who you trust, you know that we respond better. Imagine this versus your best friend versus me who walked in on the street and, ma'am, I don't like your arms crossed. You need to uncross those, please. That means you're tuned out. You need to be learning and listening. More respect if we had a relationship than me calling you out as a teacher up here. So that's important. One of the things I have struggled with over the years is culturally relevant. When I'm dealing with students, if I stand up here with my arms crossed, if I am swaying like this, if I'm sitting at my desk, I don't get nearly as much interaction. But if I'm making eye contact, I'm making them have a little smile here and there. Sometimes, this is kind of an awkward room for it, but I like to walk around the classroom because not only that, I can see their monitors. I can look around and see who's paying attention and who's not. But moving around makes a lot of students nervous. They don't like you behind them. It's cultural. They don't like that. When you're talking with Hispanic students a lot of times, they'll be absent and you'll ask why. Anybody know the number one reason why we used to get Hispanic students absent? Culturally, they babysat. Babysitting. If parents both worked and they didn't have anybody to watch the student, the high school students would stay home to watch the younger kids. And so it impacted their education. But the family need, they're very family driven, was the younger children. They needed somebody to take care of them. And so when you have undocumented students coming through your classroom, we were a high transition district, you heard that a lot. You heard that a lot. And that takes a while to get used to first. But then secondly, you have to build that relationship with the student and the parents to explain education is where your student is going to benefit and get out of this cycle that you're stuck in. And so I see some nods. I think some of you have dealt with that. Anybody know much about the Pacific Islander culture? Fiercely loyal. Fiercely loyal. You say something negative or wrong or slightly out of culture to them, you'll hear about it from every extended cousin they have. Every extended cousin, whether you spoke to them or not. There's a lot of cultural missteps you can make. So when I started here, Joe Brusick sat me down and he said, our district, or our county is over 50% Hispanic right now. He said, don't speak Spanish if you can't speak Spanish. So I have broken Spanish. I can say a couple of phrases. But what I'm not prepared for is what everybody rattles back to me really quickly. And he said, you have to be humble. You have to sit and watch for 6 months and figure out where everybody goes, how they operate, and what they bring to the table. Then you can have an opinion. Be humble. That's what he kept saying. Be humble. And it's very true. It's culturally different here than it is in Tacoma. Very culturally different. And I had plenty of opportunities to put my foot in my mouth, and some of them I did, some of them I didn't. But culturally relevant is hugely important when you're dealing with populations that are not the same ethnic, social, economic, or racial classes as you are. It says here to collect data. Again, this is subject to misuse. It's subject to school trainings. You'll see that data on the beginning of the school year. It can be construed any way you want it to be. So I encourage you to ask questions about data. How's it being used? How are your calculations made? What is being compared to what? That's a key question right there. Always know what is being compared to what. Problem-solving approaches and inclusion kind of go together. One of the hardest things I ever had to do was my last year teaching, worked at a school in Tacoma, and they were strongly believed in the restorative justice system. So the principal would pull the student out, the SRO would pull the student out, they'd have a conversation, they'd come in and apologize, sit down, and start doing it again. And as a teacher, I'm trying to teach 30 students, and I have this one that I just cannot get to shut up, or cannot stay in his seat, or will not stop annoying the kid next to him. And you go to the principal and you say, hey, he's impacting my ability to teach the other 29. At what point does this student become more important than the other 29? And that's the basis of the restorative justice. Until you can get that student to understand his impact on everybody else, you can't get a satisfactory response from him. But that's relationship building. If I had a better relationship with that student, I might have gotten through. If the SRO or the principals had better relationships, they might have gotten through. We weren't able to do it. Sometimes you fail, sometimes you succeed. But again, including the student and the family voice, being culturally responsive to your students. But then also you have layers of systems. So we talked in the classroom, we talked with the SRO, we talked with the principal. Eventually we had family meetings and his schedule was cut in half and he was mostly in a self-contained room. But I don't think he needed to be in a self-contained room. It was because we couldn't reach him, which was unfortunate. When that happens, you create the cycle. You're not pulling that kid to his full potential. That kid is learning he doesn't have to get there. Okay. So a lot of what we talked about is on this screen. What are the long-term consequences when they're kicked out of the classroom? Suspensions, disengagement with school, dropouts, criminal justice involvement. Is it a correlation or a causation? I think you can make arguments for both. I honestly think you can make arguments for both. But I will tell you, if a student isn't given the opportunity to learn, the student isn't going to progress grade-wise. The harder the student thinks education is, the less likely that student is to be successful. And that goes to behavior, that goes to counseling, that goes to Band-Aids, that goes to anything else we do in the classroom with the student. Because in the big picture, SROs and teachers are not that different. We deliver content, you deliver safety, but our interactions with everybody are the same. How you doing? What you doing? Did you have a good day? Did you turn in your homework? What's your challenge? Research shows exclusion and expulsion do not improve the behavior of students. So as a teacher, what in the hell am I doing then? Because I can't teach 29 students when I have one jumping up and down in the back. Well, that's kind of where we are right now, is we're figuring out our middle ground. What do we do with these students? How do we approach them? Relationships, relevance, and rigor. The 3 R's. If we build our relationships with our students and we are relevant what we are telling them to do, they will rise to the challenge. I invite you to look at this list here of all the things that law enforcement is considered to be. Does anybody see teacher in there? So one of the teachers I used to work with, a great guy, we used to hang out after school in a group of 5 of us teachers. he became a police officer. And you can tell he's a teacher at heart. He says, when I arrest somebody, I stop and I tell them what the law was, I tell them they broke the law, and I tell them what the consequences are going to be. You're going to be booked right now, you're going to go to jail, in the morning you'll have a court appearance. He explains it, and he said his SRO, or his FTO, was laughing at him. And he said, why are you laughing at me? I'm educating them, telling them what got them into this situation, and telling them where it's going to go. I'm preparing them for what's coming. It's a very educational kind of thing to do. He's teaching the student, the arrestee, what's going to come and why it happened, with the hope that the next time they'll be better armed and know not to do that. Over here are a whole list of qualities I am sure you've heard before: strong communicator, friendly, empathy, adaptable, caring. Those are all important qualities. So I like this phrase, chaos coordinators, because to a certain extent, teachers are chaos coordinators. We sit in a classroom full of needs, full of students screaming for our attention. And you guys sit outside, and as soon as they're out of our area, they're into your area, and they get to say, I'm free. And they have their little meltdown for the moment. And they have their release, and they scream and they yell and they run. And everybody's saying, no running in the hallways. Shh, they're still taking a test. This is the balance we have to reach. So how do we address it? I would argue first that an SRO cannot fix it on their own. They can impact it, but they cannot fix it. You're part of a cog, unfortunately, but you can certainly start taking steps to address it. And once you make movement in one direction, it's contagious. It's very contagious, but it's an attitude that you bring to the job. You can do lots of things to diminish it in every contact you have. This was what I was talking about with Leo when he became a law enforcement officer. Positive relationships, education, explaining where you came from, how you got here, and where it's going to go. You have options. This is your path. Educational expectations, culturally responsive, problem-solving approaches. How many of you sit a student down and say, these are your options, which one's the best? Think about that for a minute. How many of you say, which one is the best path here, and have that conversation with a student, allowing them to make a decision? Most of the time when we're talking about behavior, we're dictating what they did wrong and figuring out what an appropriate response or consequence is. We're not using it as an educational moment. We're not building that relationship. We're not being culturally responsive. Because if we considered that, our approach might change. Multi-tier systems, high-impact evidence-based practices. This is where your administrators like to come in and say, this is the latest study. This is showing the best results. Yeah. I've been through a few trainings at the beginning of the school year. So what I would encourage you to do today is we hear a lot of people say implicit bias. Be honest with yourself, hold yourself accountable. And so I've shared with you a couple of my biases. Students who are homeless are kind of high because they're smelly and it's just that instant recoil. Whoa, we had a bad day today. We didn't get a shower this morning, did we? And that's hard to sit next to a student that smells that badly or has that bad a breath and have a 30-minute tutoring session or conversation when you're in a confined space, which is not only warm, but now it smells in that room with them. It's hard to have that conversation. But we have to remember it's not always their fault. We have to go to, what is your lot? What do we need to give you to be successful? How can we get you there from here? And so take that opportunity to be progressive instead of punitive. That 14-year-old student, I did manage to get him a toothbrush, and I considered it a personal success when I got him to brush his teeth 3 days in a row. I didn't have to tell him in class. He did it at home. Usually, I had another one in class every day, and I handed it to him, and I said, go brush your teeth. And he'd go out to the bathroom, and he'd come back, and it was a much better moment after that. Recognize the hand you're dealt with. Recognize the student is also dealt a hand. And recognize that together, you have to recognize where the student has ended up in life. It's not something either of us can control. It has to be something that we move forward with. One of the things that we often miss, they say, listen to what they are saying and not saying. Look at their body language. Oftentimes, if you're really paying attention to them while you're talking to them, you can see that, just that little letdown. That means they're relaxing with you. That means they're showing you who they are. Talk to them about it. Why did you just do that? What did I say that made you do that? It's building the relationship. It's giving that student a chance to tell you a secret, to tell a little bit of a background, to tell an opportunity. Build the relationship. At the same time, though, they need to be held accountable. What will hold this student accountable? We as a school like to say we're even-handed with everybody. Everybody gets a suspension when they call a teacher a fucker. That's not always the case. Some teachers don't report it because they handle it in the classroom. Some teachers look at a student and say, you're having a bad day, take a few minutes, step outside, come back when you're ready. Some students are pissed at a student because they got called that and they send them down to the office or they call for an administrator. There's a lot of frontline, I like to say, behavior modification that happens between teachers and SROs. What is your approach to building a relationship with that student? What button did you push to get that student to call you that? And how could you handle it differently next time? Because one of the very first things I ever learned as a teacher, I worked at the Muckleshoot Indian tribe. And I had two ninth grade girls going at each other in classroom. They were on opposite sides, just yelling names at each other. And I just looked at them finally, and I said, you guys just need to shut up. And I said, shut up. I didn't say shut up. I said, you need to shut up, like be quiet. But I said the two words together, and it was insulting. And then the focus shifted to me, and the rest of the period was lost. It's a lot of how you talk to a student. It's a lot of how you build that relationship. And my goal was to get them to, shh, you need to be quiet. But I chose wrong words. And so we had a reaction to that. Learning moment, right? Relationships. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I don't know that this was supposed to last an hour. They like to tell me it is. But I would like to take questions from anybody. I am a juvenile prosecutor, so I will see anybody you send my direction, one way or the other. But I would like to give you that opportunity to ask questions today. Yes, sir. Oh.
So I have one as far as dealing with children and obviously not being able to talk to them once you develop probable cause. What if you made that determination that you're not going to charge them with a crime, but you think it's a good counseling moment to maybe talk to them about what they did? Is that going to be an issue at all?
I would handle that. I assume you have to write a report about it, right?
Yeah.
So there are ways to write your report where you can tube it, so to speak, so that a prosecutor can't use your conversation.
Okay.
So you can say in your report, I chose to use this as a counseling moment, even though I had probable cause, did not intend to refer it, and had that conversation with the student about how not to do it next time.
Okay.
Because not only does it help potentially build that relationship if the student can realize you cut them a break, but the next time you can send it to the office and reference the prior report and say, I spent that time with him and it didn't, or her. I think that's a bias that several of us use, male pronouns. You spent that time with him and there was no reaction, no improvement.
Okay. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
We talked about some of the disparities being ethnicity and race, but one thing I would like to also mention is some of our students go by altered names or different pronouns, and they get agitated if you call them the wrong thing as well. So I think we need to recognize that as a disparity as well.
It is. That goes towards their gender identity. And it's very difficult when you're having a conversation with somebody in front of you. The worst time of year to do that is the first month of school. You see somebody walk in that you presume is male, and you say, hey, how's it going? Or you say, he just sat down, sit next to him, please. And you get a lot of people upset about that. Unfortunately, we don't all walk around with he, him, or she, her on our shirts. And so it's a very easy mistake to make. Very easy. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
I've had one student in particular, who literally in the course of a couple months had 3 incidents that could have resulted in charges being brought. How do I, as an SSO, do I sit down with the student and say, hey, do you realize what you did could have caused you legal issues or legal problems? Or do we just kind of bag it?
I think that's where you have to follow your principal's lead. I think a lot of schools tend to shy away from the criminal justice system until parents are vocal enough that it gets pushed. I think principals generally know where that line is about calling police in for assistance versus having those counseling moments. And so what I would say is, if you're comfortable having it as a counseling moment and your principal is comfortable with that, then have the counseling moment. There's nothing worse than having a criminal justice system full of 4th-degree assaults and 3rd-degree malicious mischiefs. We really want to focus our time on the guns in school, the shootings, the more significant crimes. And so if those can be handled on a frontline defense, I'm all for it. Is that a hand? No? Anybody else? Yes, sir. Yeah, she's coming. I assume it's she. Is that right? Yes. Okay. We'll check my bias.
Just a simple question. Is there any schools still going with zero tolerance policies
Zero tolerance for what?
for anything? It just used to irate me to no end, where you got little Susie with a fingernail file in her purse and Deborah with a 18-inch Bowie knife, and they're both getting the same punishment, suspended. Basically, I guess what I'm getting at is to me, in my opinion, it took the common sense out of the denominator. The school administrator, district, people in authority were not making common sense decisions. They weren't making decisions that they were paid to make, in my opinion. It's like, we have no choice, zero tolerance, we got to suspend you.
I think there are some districts, I know on the west side. I don't know enough over here yet. I haven't had enough interaction with the schools, and I haven't been in the schools. I unfortunately get the referrals out of the schools to the criminal justice or the truancy courts. I think, did you want input?
Yes, as far as I know, it's not referred to as zero tolerance, it's just considered, this is common practice now. This is as far as what I've heard been told by administrators. This is our common practice, we suspend you for 3 days if you're involved, regardless if you're involved, participated or not.
So they're not looking at it on a case-by-case basis, based on the circumstances.
That would assume so. I don't like to assume, but that would assume.
I think one of the things they tried, if you look at the efforts to overcome disparities, one of the things they tried was to be the same in every situation for every person. And I think they're finding that that isn't working anymore.
Right.
You have to consider culture, background, interactions. And
Exactly. I've never been a fan of the zero tolerance type policies.
I haven't either. And to answer your question with fights in school, one of the things that drove me crazy was the expectation that the person getting hit is supposed to stand there and get hit. And if they fight back or defend themselves, they get suspended as well. That always drove me crazy.
Since you're a prosecutor,
I am. Right now, I'm the only one. They have a shortage of attorneys into town.
So can I just ask you a question regarding that
Sure.
incident, similar to that? So as a parent of a child, or having a parent represent their child who's been in an altercation, physical altercation at school, do the parents still have the ability to like file charges against the other child who?
So in Washington, you can file a civil complaint that turns into a criminal charge. If they can prove it, the prosecutor has to pick it up and handle the case. That is extremely rare. So the one who usually 99.9% of the time, maybe even more, is the prosecutor will file charges. And we're like the buffer to the courts. And so parents all the time will complain about something, and they might feel very vindicated in complaining, but ultimately my decision has to be, can I prove it? Is it something I need to waste my time on just to satisfy an angry parent? Or can I stop it right here and say, here's my standard, here's what I have to be able to prove, and is this a judicial use of my money and my resources to pursue this case? And so usually when we have that conversation, we can get to a resolution because they understand that the outcome isn't always worth the effort to get there, especially if the school already handled discipline.
I just had a question regarding the change in the marijuana laws. So I had a question regarding the change in marijuana laws. I was in security for a couple of years and left into a classroom for a little bit and just came back this year. And it just seems like there's no consequences for anything. Our police don't even get involved in it anymore, which was not the case 3 years ago.
So the problem is a case, State v. Blake, and that case said that the Washington State statute for possession of drugs is missing the element of knowingly possessing it. It used to be a zero tolerance. If you had it, you were guilty. And the Supreme Court said that's not okay. So they vacated everybody's convictions for straight up possession. And now the way they're approaching it is they're requiring officers to refer a juvenile to treatment 2 times before they'll refer it to a prosecutor's office. So in some respects, yes, you're absolutely right. There's sort of a blind eye, but it's a legislative problem. And we keep expecting the legislator to kind of, quote unquote, do their job and pass a law that will allow us to prosecute those again.
Yeah, we don't even take them to the SRO anymore.
Yeah.
They aren't involved in it.
Just destroy it. Yeah. So we can still prosecute intent to deliver and distribution and that sort of stuff. It's the straight up possession that gets dicey. Nobody else? Okay. I think I'm good.
All right. Thank you, Rob.